The Single Mom Success Podcast, Episode 20. Heather Wells and the Single Mom blog present Single Mom Success, the place for single moms to find support, inspiration, and the path to their own success. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Mom Success Podcast. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. We are getting back on our regular podcasting schedule. We were a little bit deterred due to the summer and just being very active, very busy. And to be quite honest, it was very hectic trying to get any type of recording done while my children were at home for the summer. There was almost always an emergency or a fight or a, hey mom, look at this, or mom, when are we going to do this? So spent the summer being like, mom. So it was very hard, and I had to honestly sit down and take stock and just decide, okay, while I want to keep a very consistent podcasting schedule, it quite literally was affecting my sanity because I was trying to get all of this podcasting done, and it was making me so frustrated every time my kids interrupted, or something happened, or they needed me, or there was a problem, or they were running in and out of my room, or they were arguing down the hall and you could hear them. Whatever it was that came up, it was always interrupting, and it started getting so frustrating for me that I couldn't even complete. It took me hours to even try to complete a recording, and I was getting so frustrated that I was becoming very short with my children. I was, getting frustrated with them, raising my voice to them. So it really wasn't worth it to me. Not that I don't love doing the podcast, but it was definitely something where I had to take stock and go, okay, I really, really, really have to figure out what is important to me. And while the podcast is important to me, it was not more important than having a good summer with my kids and having a good relationship with my kids. And I didn't like being short with them simply because they were being kids and it was summer, and it just happened to interfere with my podcasting. So I decided that if I could get them recorded, great, but if I got to the point where I was getting stressed out about it, I was just going to have to stop and try again another time. And then I thought, well, I'll just do the podcast in the evening after the kids have gone to bed. Well, after a summer of having my kids around and playing and doing things and refereeing and, patching up knees and separating, twins because they were trying to kill each other, things of that nature, I was really too tired. I was exhausted, and I don't think that anything that had come from me would have been very good quality anyway. So that is my apology, my apology for not having a very consistent podcast during the summer months. But my children are back in school, and if you could hear it, you can't hear it, but somewhere in my brain, the Hallelujah chorus is bursting out of me because they are back in school, and as much as I love them, I could not wait for them to return. And I've actually had people tell me, I actually had someone tell me, that's awful that you feel that way. How could you feel that way about your own children? And the first thing that popped into my head was, oh, you must be a new mom. Which, it isn't fair, but that actually is the first thing that popped in my head. And, I understand that, and here's the thing. And my kids even said that too. They're like, Mom, it makes us feel like you don't want us here. And so I had to kind of explain and say, I am excited for you to go back to school. It's not because I don't love you, and it's not because I don't enjoy my time with you. But at the same time, it is increasingly difficult for me to get work done during the day when you guys are here, not because you're being difficult, but because you're my children, and of course you're going to want to talk to me, and of course you're going to want to interrupt, and of course you're going to want to be around me, and of course we're going to want to do things together for the summer, and that's not a bad thing. But I'm really glad it's not all year round. And again, not because I don't love you, but I get more done during the day while you are at school, which is also a really good thing. I said, stop and think about it from another perspective. Don't look at it as, I can't wait for you to go back to school. Look at it as, I can't wait for you to be able to come home to a mom who has already finished all of her work, so she is able to give you her focus. to a mom who has finished what she needed to do for the day, so she is able to sit down and help you with your homework. We are able to go out and do some things. We can go to the park while the weather's still nice. Things of that nature. During the summer, while you guys are out, I'm having to just sort of do work as I can in between all of the other chaos that's going on around me. And it is very difficult to maintain that because, it really wreaks havoc on my productivity. So I was definitely not as productive during the summer months. And, I said, so that's really the only reason. I said, and on top of that, aren't you guys ready to spend time away from each other? You started off the summer strong, and maybe your kids are like this, moms, if you want to chime in the comments, but, my kids started out the summer strong. They were great. They were having a lot of fun together, but there comes a point, and I think it's different for every family and every set of kids, where for a lot of families, that the children get to a point where they're sort of sick of each other. Like, they get on each other's nerves to no end. And it's little, tiny, insignificant things that cause the biggest, uproar in my home. And it's something that, normally wouldn't be as big of a deal, but I think because they'd spent 2.5 months together, without interruption, that they were starting to really get on each other's nerves. My daughter was wanting to go out and play with with my son. She wanted to play with her brother. Well, he's 14. He's going to be 15 in a month. And, he didn't always want to play with his little sister tagging along. He wanted to do something else, or he wanted to be by himself. And so he would get frustrated with her always asking. She would get frustrated because he didn't want to play with her, so she would get her feelings all hurt. And it was just this constant, just drama. It was drama for months. And it was, after a while, I thought, gosh, I said, that's the other reason that I love you guys. But I can't wait for you guys to get back to school, spend time with your other friends, get back into a routine, and that way you're not spending all of your time with each other. And I think that when you guys aren't spending all of your time with each other, you appreciate each other more, and you enjoy each other's company more because you're not constantly in each other's faces. So they kind of understood that, and like I said, a lot of people, agreed with me when I said I couldn't wait for them to go back, and I had a lot of people who, kind of gave me some flack about it. But, to each their own. And if you are one of those moms who your children around you all the time, every single moment of the day, and you can make that work, and you hang on to your sanity, then I fully applaud you. But I was going crazy, and my kids were going crazy. So I think, in a way, they looked forward to going back to school as well, and seeing their friends, and, getting back into their lives like they had them before summer. So now that they are back, I intend for the podcast to be more regular again and get on an even keel. So with that being said, today's podcast, actually, we already sort of touched on the topic. It is about kind of learning where your limit is. What do you need to stop doing in order to be happy? Or when do you need to realize that you have to let something go because it's not making you happy, or it's just constantly frustrating you? So like I explained in the beginning, with the podcast, I was trying like crazy. I mean, I really, really wanted to stay and maintain my focus on the podcast as much as I possibly could during the summer. Unfortunately, it just wasn't realistic. And it's not because the desire wasn't there. It's not because I didn't want to do it. It really ended up not being realistic. And I tried like crazy, and like I mentioned before, drove myself and my children absolutely nuts trying to meet that expectation. So I think that, a lot of us do this. I think, I mean, I know that I've done it in the past in many different circumstances. So, for example, with my daughter's dad, with my ex, I spent a significant amount of time trying to make that relationship function, or function in the way that I felt it should function. And I worked at it and tried to work at it and kept pushing it and trying to, force it into what I wanted it to be and make it fit into this little mold. I tried to, in my perception, like I tried to make him fit into the little mold, and it wasn't working. I spent, and of course, when you're in it, you don't realize these things. It's only when you're done with it that you can look back and go, oh my God, what in the world was I doing? And so I sit there and I look back at that relationship, and he was no saint and I was no saint, and there were mistakes made across the board by both of us. But I look back and I realize that I spent a significant amount of time and energy and emotional just stress trying to make something work that was just never going to work. It was never going to work. And, like I said, I can see that now, but there are some times when you have to look at something and know that the best thing that you can do is walk away from it. Whether it is a relationship that is not working and is likely not going to work, whether it's a job that makes you miserable, whether it is a project that you have put, a lot of time into or thought into, but just can't seem to make it happen. There's so many different places in your life where this can kind of creep up. And it's sort of, the old, people used to always tell people, they tell you now, I don't know why I say used to, but like you'll go to somebody and say, hey, this is my idea, or this is what I'm thinking of. And, people will tell you, well, why don't you weigh the pros and cons? Well, it's a very good kind of mindset. And, the pros of things like the relationship that I had with my ex was, if we could make everything work, I think it would be a great relationship. I think that, I would be good for him. I think that if we could make this function, or if he stopped drinking, then this would work. And the pros would be that, Brooklyn would have her father and her mother together, and I really care about this guy, and his life would be better for it, and I think my life would be better for it. And then I start looking at how I actually presented that. If he quit drinking, then it would work. If we could make the relationship work, then it would be a good thing. But here's the thing, it wasn't actually working, so technically it wasn't a pro, it was a con. And if the cons outweigh the pros, if the bad outweighs the good, then it's probably something that you should let go. And this doesn't always apply. I mean, there's people who they're chasing their dreams of, being an artist or being a singer, and that's a lot, that takes a lot of struggle and hard work, and there are a lot of cons involved in that. But here's the thing. If that is your passion and you feel passionate about that, and it is something that, for me, I love to sing. I love singing. And, other than my children, singing gives me so much joy. Now, it's not something that I have ever considered pursuing as a career or a life. I may have had dreams of it when I was younger, of course, but I can totally understand how the joy that gives you performing and doing something that you love just with everything you have, you continue to do that even though there are a lot of cons. You're chasing that dream and that passion that you have. And I'm not saying ignore that. I'm saying if there are things in your life, and they may just be small things, for example, just like my podcast. I love doing the podcast. It's something that I definitely am working on building up and want to be dedicated to. And I definitely want to have that, regular podcast go out. But I don't want it to be something where I sacrifice my happiness to make it happen. So see the difference? If you're chasing your dream and your passion and it makes you happy, then, the stress and the downsides and the cons and the things that come along that are difficult, you are still pursuing something that truly makes you happy. And that is the difference. With my ex, I'd say about 80% of the time, I wasn't happy. I was unhappy 80% of the time. And the 20% that I was happy was not enough for me to really, it shouldn't have been enough for me to really continue on in that relationship. But I was stupid and naive, and I was doing the whole, but if I keep working at it, it'll, if I just keep pushing hard enough, this square peg will fit into this round hole and everything will be okay. And it just wasn't going to happen that way. And the same thing with the podcast. It's not that the desire wasn't there, but I was miserable trying to make it happen over the summer. I was making my children miserable. I was snapping at my kids. It was at the cost of my own happiness trying to meet this goal. And that's just not the way it should be. So, that's the same thing. And I look at it and, here's an example of another thing. I had a client in my virtual assistant job, and he was, at the time, my biggest client. He brought in the majority of my income. It came from him. And because of that, I dealt with he had to have been the most difficult person to work with to date. Now, that doesn't mean he was a bad person. He was a good person at heart. He, tried in his own way to be a good person. He was just very self-involved and didn't always realize the way he treated other people, and didn't always realize that he was a very, very demanding person. Now, that may not necessarily be a bad thing. However, in the industry that I worked in as a virtual assistant, and, still to this day with what I do with my small business consulting, he wasn't my only client. He wasn't the only person that I worked for. He was responsible for the majority of what I did, but he wasn't my only client, and didn't pay me enough to be my only client. In fact, he paid me less than all of my other clients did. So here I was working for somebody, doing work for someone who made me unhappy, caused me regular stress and frustration, and he was paying me less than my other clients. And really it came about one day that I just had to stop and go, and I still to this day, I tell people all the time, I talk to prospective clients and we talk about, what they expect from a consultant and what I expect from a client to make sure that it is a good fit. And one of my biggest things is I don't work for assholes. I don't work for people who are jerks. I don't work for people who mistreat their employees. I did not get into business for myself to be miserable. I've worked for people and at jobs where the people who were my superiors were just plain jerks, and I had to put up with it because I worked for that company or for that person. I am self-employed now. I make my own rules. I make my own hours. I decide who I work with, when I work, how I work, and that is the glory of doing what I do. And so I sat down with this guy and I said, it's, and he realized that there was something going on because I was not as, cheerful as I had been in the past with him. And he asked me, he said, he said, I think that maybe we need to rethink our arrangement. And I said, I agree, because I don't think it's working. And he agreed, and that ended our working relationship. And to be perfectly honest, it was the best thing that ever could have happened. I was instantly relieved. Now, I was worried because, like I said, he was one of the bigger sources of my income. But I did have to do the same thing. I had to sit down and go, is this money that I'm making right now worth me being so miserable and stressed and unhappy on a regular basis? Like, this person, when his phone number came up on my caller ID on my phone, I would instantly tense up, my shoulders would start hurting, and my stomach would start churning. He made me physically uncomfortable because he stressed me out that much. And it just wasn't worth it. And I truly had to stop and go, there is really no amount of money that he could pay me or anyone could pay me that is worth me being absolutely miserable, because the money is not worth it to me. Now, the best thing about that is I was able to lose him, and without having to dedicate so much time to him, I was able to sign on, instead of dedicating like 30 hours a week to this one client, I was able to find 3 new clients who paid me more, and I worked less than what I did for him. And that's with 3 combined. So I made more money in total with 3 new clients than I did with that one client working more hours, making less money. And it just kind of showed me that there really is a better way and how I wanted to live my life. And so I still, to this day, will sit down and go, is this what I really want? Do I really want to do what I'm doing? Is it going to bring me happiness? Or even if it's not going to bring me happiness per se, is it going to make me miserable? If it's not going to make me miserable, then it's worth me considering. But I'm not going to continue to try and do something and beat my head up against a wall and then wonder why I have a headache, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not going to do that. So, stop and think in your life. Are there things that you find you are doing? Are you still dealing with maybe a toxic friend who, never has any happy news, is one of those friends that just never ever seems to, like, they make you feel drained? Maybe that is somebody who, while it's not because maybe it's, you still love them as a friend, or maybe you don't, who knows? But maybe you just keep them around because that's how it's always been. But stop and think. Are they enriching your life, or are they draining your life? And if they're draining your life, is there any positive coming out of that? Are you getting any, is there anything good coming from that friendship? Or is it just something that's toxic and negative and draining? Are you still trying to make something work with somebody in your life that, maybe isn't working? Are you staying with somebody who's treating you crappy in the hopes that maybe they'll come around and be a nice guy? Maybe that's not worth it. Are you working at a job that, you just are super unhappy with? Maybe it's time to start looking for a job that will make you happy, right? Because here's the thing. And people, I've had people say this. They're like, how could you possibly give up a client who you knew you were getting X amount of dollars from and without knowing that you were going to have anything coming in? I'm not going to say it wasn't scary. I'm not going to say it wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. Like, I'm not going to say I didn't have times of panic. I totally panicked. But the sense of relief, like getting that weight lifted off my shoulders, was far better than the panic. It was so much better than the panic. And once you have that negativity and that weight lifted off of you, it's amazing how many possibilities you start seeing. Like, if you've got, like, I couldn't believe or even think about trying to take on new clients while I was working with this man who was draining the life out of me. But once I wasn't working with that person anymore, it was like, I can take on another client. I could take on 5 new clients. I could take on whatever and make more money. Like, I could charge more because, they're new clients. It's not an existing client who doesn't want to give me a raise, even though I raised my rates. Like, I could do all this stuff, right? So the possibilities and the opportunities became so much greater for me once I had that negativity and that stress lifted off of me. So that's what today's podcast is about, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that it kind of maybe brought you to some realizations or helped you in some way, because like I said, this shows up through all facets of your life. Like I said, I had a client that it showed up with my ex, it showed up with my podcast, it'll show up with my kids. Like, there's lots of times where, and people call it picking your battles, right? There are many, many times with my children where I pick my battles. There are things that I know I could stress about and kind of get into it with my kids about, but then I stop and think, I'm like, is that one little thing really worth the happiness? Is it worth getting into a fight with my children about? No. And in all honesty, when I think about stuff like that, it changes the way I respond to it. So if I'm looking at my children's laundry on the floor again, because they didn't pick up their clothes again, instead of me just like absolutely blowing my top, which I'm not saying doesn't still happen. I'm human. I still make mistakes. There's still times I lose my shit with my kids. Excuse the language, but that's what it is. But at the same time, there's lots of times where I stop and I'm like, ugh, and I really would want to just go, oh my God, how many times do I have to tell you to pick this up? And like I said, sometimes that happens still, but most of the time, it's me going, come on, guys, like, realizing that it's not worth being angry about. It's not going to make anything better. And in fact, it's going to probably bring on a lot of misery and unhappiness. And it's just not something I'm willing to sacrifice my happiness or my children's happiness or anything else for. So I just handle it differently. So there's lots of places where this can show up in your life where you can stop and go, is what I'm doing something that's helping me, serving me, making me happy? Or am I miserable doing this and it's, what I'm getting out of it is not worth the misery that I am suffering through to get it? And if the answer is no, then, maybe you need to reevaluate that. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you would like, I would love if you would make sure to follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Be sure to subscribe to the blog if you haven't. It's thesinglemomblog.com. We'd love to see you there. There's a lot of other articles and blog posts. And again, now that some school is back in session, the Hallelujah course is still there. The podcast will be on a more regular basis. So I look forward to talking to you guys next week. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye. You've been listening to the Single Mom Podcast, the place to go for support, encouragement, and maybe a few laughs along the way. Please also make sure you head on over to the Single Mom blog for more great stuff for single moms. We have resources, free things to print out, great articles. Can't wait to see you there. Be sure to leave feedback and comments because we love hearing from other single moms. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to subscribe.